And now we're up to Daf Ayin Omid Beis. Lamata min habeitzim. What does lamata mean? Below the testicles. Lamala min habeitzim, above the testicles. So letting blood from any part of the body that is below the testicles, let's say the thighs or the legs, is very dangerous and it will be harmful to the production of zera. Whereas letting blood from a section of the body that's above the testicles, let's say the shoulders, the necks, the hips, is highly beneficial. Ukshus shalo bizman, hops that are not in season, tana. We learned in a brayso kishem shekoshe shalo bizmana, just as hops are harmful when they're not in season, kach yof bizmana, so too they are beneficial when in season. Omer Papa is mana. What's the season for hops? Tammuz, the summer months. Shalo bizmana teves, in the winter months of teves, they're not in season. Yomi Nisan, Yomi Tishrei. During the days of Nisan and Tishrei, the spring and the fall, lo malu v'lo kosher, they're neither beneficial nor harmful. And this ends the sugya, the long, agadatu of medicine. And now here on Daf Ayin Amud Beis, we get back in Mitzvah Hashem to Masechet Gittin. We learned in the Mishnah, Omar Kisvu get lishli v'chazo kurdaikus v'chazo v'yamal tichtevu ein dvar achronim klum. So even though he made a statement nullifying his original commission of writing a get, since he was in a state of kurdaikus, that nullification is not valid. Okay, so now what do? He's in a state of kurdaikus. Can we deliver the get? If he had appointed the shliach when he was shafri, when he was normal, now he's deranged, but it doesn't matter. We could give the get. And Rabbi Yochanan, we cannot deliver the get until he goes back to his normal state. My time of Reish Lakish, from whence did Reish Lakish draw his conclusion? The Ketani, it says in our Mishnah, Ein bidvar v'achronim klum. The cancellation and the nullification while he was a kurdaikus is meaningless. It's worthless. And therefore, there's no reason why we should be inhibited to deliver the get immediately. We don't have to wait until he goes back to his normal state. Rabbi Yochanan responds, Ein bidvar v'achronim klum. When I read the Mishnah, I interpret it thusly. Dilechi mitzil. It means his original minui is still valid, and when he goes back to his normal lucidity, then lo tzarich mehed miluchei. We don't have to go back and require a second round of minui. We can rely on the validity of the first round. But we cannot write the get until he goes back to his original state of lucidity. Now, the Gemara is going to analyze this machlokes between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. I just want to offer a possible suggestion that the suggestion that I'm going to give is not correct because the Gemara gives an alternative, but what we could have said if not for the Gemara. We could have suggested that the machlokes between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan revolves around the nature of shlichus, whereas Reish Lakish understands that once a person appoints a shliach, then all the koach, all the power and authority and validity is now transferred over to the shliach. The shliach now stands on his own. And as long as there's still ishus, because the get hasn't been delivered, then the shliach could serve as a get, as a shliach. However, Rabbi Yochanan understands, no. Shlichus means that he's constantly getting the status of a shliach. And there's an ongoing perpetual generation of shlichus through the mishalech to the shaliach. But if the mishalech is now a kordaikus situation, then the shlichus cannot operate. We have to wait until he goes back to his original state, even though Rabbi Yochanan concedes that even though he's kordaikus, the original minui is still chal, but the maisa gerushin or the maisa shliach cannot be implemented as long as the mishalech is incapable of that maisa. But the Gemara offers a different approach entirely. And the machlokus is going to be about the nature and the status of kurdaikus. But my commitment. Reish Lakish medami lili yoshen and Rabbi Yochanan medami lili shota. Reish Lakish understands that Kerdaikus is a state of sleep, so to speak. And it means he's not really puzzled to give a get. The Yoshe, and a person who's sleeping can give a get, but he can't give a get because he's not aware of the Gerushin. And Kerdaikus is just like a sleeping person. And the reason why the Shliach can operate according to Reish Lakish on behalf of the Mishalech, who's Kerdaikus, is just like a Shliach can operate on behalf of a Mishalech who's Yoshen. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan understands that right now he's in a state of Shota. He's puzzled from giving a get. So even though he appointed the Shliach before he was a Shota, the Shliach cannot give the get as long as the Mishalech is a Shota. Why does Rabbi Yochanan refuse the analogy of Reish Lakish? And let's classify and define Kerdaikus as a Yoshen. Lo. Yoshen lo mechusar maisa, but hai mechusar maisa. Yoshen means that any second he'll wake up on his own, whereas in the case of Kerdaikus, we have to undertake an entire process, a healing process, in order to bring him back to his state of briut, of health and normalcy. And we have to give him basar kachush, it's totally al gabi gecholim, as we learned back on Daf Samach Zayin Amud Beis. So since we need a refuah, and he's not going to just wake out of it and step out of it on his own like a Yoshen wakes up, therefore, if Yochanan holds, he cannot compare him to a Yoshen, he's really a Shota. And there's no possibility of giving a get on behalf of a Shota. Reish Lakish nami nidami l'Shota. Why does Reish Lakish reject the analogy of Rabbi Yochanan between a Kerdaikus case and a Shota? Shota lo sami v'yodam. In the case of a Shota, we don't have a refuah that will guarantee that he'll snap out of his state of Shota. But in the case of Achsel Kerdaikus, samye b'yodam, we have the refuah that we mentioned earlier with the meat and the wine. Is bisra sumka gumre. We take lean meat and we roast it on coals, and chamed merka, and yayin mozug, which is diluted wine. And once we have the two, we have a refuah. Therefore, Reish Lakish says he's like a Yoshe. He's not like a Shota. And therefore, he's kosher for Nesinas Haget. Frek the Gemara, Miyam Rabbi Yochanan Hachi, is it true that Rabbi Yochanan holds that you cannot write a get unless the Mishalech is absolutely lucid? And that's why Rabbi Yochanan disqualifies the get of Kerdaikus. V'ha Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. We're going to prove that a person who's in a state of confusion can nevertheless give a get, or at least we'll give a get on his behalf. Shachad bo shnaim or rov shnaim. Now you have the kind of the Veshet, right? The windpipe in the esophagus, that it was rov shnaim was cut, and he's going to die. He's still alive. He's very close to his death. The Ramaz v'yomar kisvu get lishti, from his remizos, we could see that he's commissioning us to write a get. In other words, we're going to say to him, should we write a get for your wife? And he is able to shake his head. We're allowed to write the get and deliver the get. And Vitanya, we learned in a Brisa, or Umaguyad, so too, if we saw him cut up, but he's still breathing, Ot Soluv al Tzliva, he's crucified. The Ramaz v'Yomer Kisvu get least, he responds to that question of, should we write a get for your wife? And he nods his head. So you see that even though a person is in the throes of death, and ain't daitum yusheves alav, he's certainly not lucid. Nevertheless, we can give the get based on his remizo. So how could Rabbi Yochanan say that in the case of Kerdaikus, we cannot write a get until he snaps out of it and returns to his original state of health? So the truth is, I don't understand exactly the Gemara's analogy, but the Gemara itself rejects it. So it could only, force us to try to understand the Havamim. Hochi Ashta, what kind of comparison is this between Yotzei Li Hareg and the case of Achsel Kerdaikus? Also in the case where he is on his way to death. But Daito Tzli Susa, he still has Das Tzlul, he still has lucidity. Even though his body is obviously very weak, but we can rely on his remiza. But hacha here in the case of Achsel Kodaikus, Daite Shigishta means mivul belis. He's totally confused, totally deranged. And Rabbi Yochanan says that we cannot give a get until he becomes shofar. Now the Gemara is going to ask a kasha on Shmuel. Shmuel was the one who said that if he's yotzili hareg, we can give a get based on his remizos. Umiyar Shmuel hachi. Does Shmuel really maintain in truth that Adam yotzili hareg, even though his hariga has begun, we can still give a get to his wife? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Shachab Oshnayim Rov Shnayim Ubarach Me'idin Olav. If after the shechita he was able to somehow run, then we could testify him in Bezdin that he's a dead man, and his wife could get remarried. Once we saw that the hariga began, then he's definitely going to die. But if you're telling me, no, we can give the get on his behalf, says Shmuel, then it means he's still alive. Either of how we testified, we cannot testify now, at this moment, when he was barach, that he is alive, but rather we have to wait a certain period of time in which it's reasonable to assume that he expired, and that's called sofal lomus, and therefore, liachar zman, we can testify that he died. But in the case of, just 1 second, of giving a get now, meaning if he does through a miza write a get, then he's still chai, then we can write the get. We can testify that he dies if a certain period of time passes. Now, I'm looking to see how much time has to pass here. Let me just see. Let's see in the footnote, does he tell you? So apparently the Yavitz doesn't come to any definite conclusion about this. Let me just see one more thing. He says here a reasonable amount of time elapsed. He doesn't give you a specific amount of time. If you're saying that after his shechita he's going to die, and therefore we can testify that he's dead and be back to his wife, is ye gol al yodo? We have a brisa that's going to indicate that if somebody shechts someone else bishogeg, then he doesn't go into golus, even though it's sofal lomos. V'aloma Tanya, why is it saying the brisa shakabo shnaimer of shnaimer reis eno gola? Why doesn't he go into golus? Why did Shmuel say that we could testify that he's a dead man? So obviously shchita of shnaim is a maisa hariga, maisa retzach, and he's considered dead. It may take a minute or two, but he's going to die. So why doesn't he go into golus if he did that b'shogeg? And the Gemara answers ha'itmar Allah. Regarding this brisa of Rav Oshia, we have a commentary of Rav Oshia Chayshina and Shemaruach Bilbasi Nami Shu Kireves Misasa, the two possible chashoshos, and that's based on these chashoshos. We will not send the rotzech to golus. Number one, it's possible that there's wind that's blowing, and that's going to actually bring about his death, or perhaps his shaking, which is called pirkus, brought about his death. So again, he's definitely a Rotzeach, but as far as or a Miklot is concerned, then Golus, we have a Ptur if something caused the final death, some other factor. So again, to be matir his wife, we need Yedias. We have a certain 100% knowledge that he died, and that we have. So for longs. However, as far as Chiv Golus, we need a Maisa Hariga Hamuchlat. So the language of the Pnei Yoshua. The Keren Shekiriv Misaso Mikoch Elu Potumi Golus. So that's a separate ptur that would make it as far as Golus is concerned because he killed him b'shogeg. My b'nayin nafkami kabinayin deshachte b'bei deshashya. If there was a marble wall around him so that there's no ruach, he says, there was a marble house. The wind could not have contributed to the victim's death because the marble house protected him from the wind. However, his own pirkus, which he, by the way, translates as writhing, indeed might have contributed to his death. Now we go back to the Mishnah. He became mute, and they said to him, shall we write a get for your wife? The hirchin beroshan, he nodded his head. His boat can also shalosh pamim. We test him 3 times. And Omar lav lav, he said no, when the no is the appropriate answer. Fial hein hein, he said yes. And he nodded his head up and down with the appropriate answer. Then Harel Yitmu V'yit Fektig Amar V'lechush Dilma Shichye Dilav Lav Nokte. Maybe a nodding movement has taken hold of him. In other words, we're talking about a choli in the case of the shtatek, and maybe that choli expressed itself in that his body is almost forced to nod up and down, or this way or that way. He doesn't have any kavana when he nods his head to agree. So how does this bedika really determine and establish that he is bedaita? Rav Yosef, Bar Yomi, Rav Nachman, Diamrina Lebes Seragin. We wait a period of time between each nod. And after the nod, we ask him another question. Or we ask him the same question again. And he responds in the appropriate way. That's a simon that determines that he's bedaita. And we don't have to be worried that because of the choli, he shook his head, because we asked him 3 times with hafsakos and not contiguous and not continuous. So when we ask for lechush dilma shichya de seriginakte, maybe the choli has caused him to shake his head periodically. So the fact that you did it b'serigin really doesn't prove anything. And the Gemara answers, we ask him one question where the appropriate answer is no. And then afterwards, we ask him 2 questions where the appropriate answer is yes. Then we ask him 2 questions and the appropriate answer is no. Another question we ask him and the appropriate answer is hein. And he got all of them correct. We no longer have a chashash that maybe because of the choli, he was nodding his head in this direction or in that direction. The Bei Rabbi Shmuel Tana, we learned in the base medrash of Rabbi Shmuel, Omrim Lo. We ask him, Dvarim Shel Yemos Hachama, we ask him if he wants summer clothes the Yemos HaGsham during the winter, or the Yemos HaGsham, does he want winter clothes, in the Yemos HaChama in the sun? And again, if he gives us the appropriate answer, then that's a proof that he is competent. What exactly do you have in mind when you talk about clothing and apparel that's appropriate for the summer of the month? Elim, if you're going to tell me that what's appropriate in the wintertime, glufkare. He says glufkare is a talis shaltsemer, a warm woolen garment, hamachamemes, that warms up his body. It's very appropriate for the wintertime. Fekta Gemara, that doesn't prove a thing. Maybe as a result of his disease, his illness, he feels very cold, and he was gripped by a chill during the summer months, or perhaps a fever gripped him during the winter. So even competent people will ask for these items under those unique circumstances. And sdini, and we have linen sheets. And even a competent person occasionally will ask for quote-unquote unsuitable items because of the chill or because of fever. So why does his request for such items prove that he's incompetent? Maybe he needs something warm in the summer because he's chilled. Maybe he needs something light in the winter because he's got a fever and he doesn't want to sweat so much. So Rabbi Shmuel is implying that to verify competence, we must ask these particular questions. And if a person's response to those questions does not prove whether he is incompetent, then why doesn't Rabbi Shmuel suggest a different test? This doesn't seem to be the appropriate test. And here on the top of Daf Ayin Aleph, Ela Beperi. The question we're going to ask him is about seasonal fruits. Bepero she'ena mitzuyim v'yoset kufa. He says, we ask him, do you want this pre? And there's no way to find it. It's out of season. And he responds, Hain. It means that he's Eino B'daito, he's incompetent. Frek the Gemara, I don't know that he's not competent. Maybe he, he thinks that you could get that fruit. He says here, we ask him whether he wants to pick an out-of-season, he wants us to pick an out-of-season fruit for him. If he nods, this proves that he's incompetent. If he merely shakes his head, however, this is the Yad Ramah, this does not necessarily prove that he is mentally competent. To prove that he is competent, we must determine that he understands the foolishness of our offer. Since shaking the head might simply indicate that he's disinterested in that fruit, we don't know if he's saying that, why are you asking for that fruit? It doesn't even, you can't buy it now at this time of the year. He must shake his head incredulously to prove his competence. So here we're going to end on the top of Daf Ayin Aleph Omid Aleph. Now tomorrow's Erev Tisha B'Av. We have to discuss Thursday, which is Tisha B'Av. In theory, I'm just throwing out a possibility. Although Tisha B'Av ends pretty late, if you're up to it, if I'm up to it, maybe we could do Thursday's daf at 10 o'clock at night or something like that.
Okay. Not impossible. Yeah.
Theoretically, we'll discuss it. All right.
See how we feel.
Thank you so much.